Hey, Maybe God fam, thanks for tuning into our YouTube channel today. We're going to be posting more and more fresh content to our YouTube channel specifically, and in some cases exclusively. So be sure and like this video, but also subscribe to our Maybe God channel. And be sure and what'd you say, Cam?
Smash that
Smash the
subscribe
subscribe
button.
button and the notification bell so you can get notified of all our upcoming content that's coming out. So today I'm in the Maybe God studio with our season 4 Maybe God podcast guest, Cam Ayala. What's up, Cam?
Hey, Eric.
Glad you're here, man. Cam's episode, if you heard it, it featured Cam and Bachelor star
Ben Higgins.
Ben Higgins, the man. And the episode was called "Will You Accept This Rose?" It was
Mm,
released almost a year ago.
yeah, it was.
Seems like longer than that.
COVID
It's
times.
been a year, and a lot has happened in Cam's life since then. So, Cam, welcome back, man. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. So, just remind us briefly, as briefly as possible,
Okay.
because I know how much you love talking about this, about your experience on the Bachelorette show.
Yes. So, um, goodness, it was about 3 years ago that it all went down, and I was on the season of The Bachelorette with Hannah Brown. People know her as Alabama Hannah. And long story short, it started very well. I got the first rose before the first impression rose, and
Ooh,
that had never happened before.
I don't know
So,
what that means, but that
y-
sounds amazing.
yeah, I guess so. And so basically, that was my way into the public light in reality TV. And honestly, when I was out there and getting that first rose, I felt affirmed very quickly.
Yeah.
And that honestly was the curse because there was a very large target placed on my back between the men in the house. And about 3 weeks into the journey there, I decided to open up to the Bachelorette about my chronic disease called lymphedema, which we'll get into that a little bit later on. But
Right.
as I opened up to her, some of the other guys in the mansion felt necessary to approach her after that conversation and basically accuse me of fabricating this medical sob story so I could get what they referred to as a pity rose.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, she believed the guy's narrative, and I was sent home that night.
Yeah. If you didn't listen to that episode and the whole story, it's gut wrenching. Even if you're not like a Bachelor or Bachelorette, franchise fan,
Yeah.
because it's more than just a show. It's your life, and you were really destroyed publicly.
Yeah, and most contestants, really for any reality show, you're not truly prepared for life after the show. Because of the advent of social media, you're basically granting literally millions of people worldwide access into your life, right? By way of sending direct messages to you. So that range from death threats to just getting like crazy memes created about me. And even people who I grew up really enjoying, like Jimmy Kimmel and David Spade, for example, they both roasted me pretty bad on their
Did they
shows.
really?
Yeah, go on YouTube, you can find those clips, and,
Yeesh.
even just some of the scenes where the whole pity roast thing, that's all on YouTube, I'm sure you can find that, and if that wasn't enough, I felt, that I really liked the pain and suffering in that environment enough to go and do Bachelor in Paradise some 2 months later.
Bro.
But I think my whole goal for that was really just this whole search for redemption, right? Because I think in times in life when people, regardless if they're on reality TV or they're just maybe getting out of a bad relationship or a bad career,
Yeah.
redemption can be that key to give them like clarity, closure, and a path forward. So I was literally going into Paradise thinking, okay, well, it couldn't get much worse than The Bachelorette. And well, I'll let the
Famous last
viewers,
words.
yeah, I'll let the viewers go back and watch at their own discretion. But
But it got worse.
it did.
Yeah.
Not so much their filming and through that experience, but mostly internally for me when I got home.
Okay.
Because I'm sure a lot of people are aware when you're out there filming, we don't have our phones, we don't have any connection to our friends and family and people you can confine into.
Right.
And you're literally at the mercy of trusting your fellow contestants, which there's a lot of strategery in
Uh-huh.
that, and obviously within the production team. So when you get sent back home, you're really kind of left to your own device to cope however you feel is going to be effective. And I'm sure we can dig into that a little
Yeah,
bit deeper.
sure. And we did some in
Yes.
the episode in season 4, and I do recommend that our whoever's watching this now, if you haven't listened to that episode, I mean, you really shared your heart on that and the whole story behind, the concerted effort among the producers, really, and not just the other contestants. But every season needs a villain,
Right.
and you were that guy.
Right.
And what made it worse was how you were in part villainized because of something that was really real to you, and you were vulnerable about this struggle with lymphedema.
Right.
Just tell us again, or remind us what lymphedema is.
Right. So, just high level, there's actually two types of lymphedema. There's primary and secondary. Secondary is a little bit more common, but just high level, what lymphedema means is first off, everybody has a lymphatic system. It's responsible for moving fluid in and out of our body that is directly correlated to our immune system, right? So, if you have a compromised lymphatic system, oftentimes the symptoms are severe swelling in any extremity.
Uh huh.
It can really be all over your body. There's patients in head and neck, but for me, I was born with primary lymphedema and it really impacts my right leg. It swells substantially, daily pain. It requires daily management of wearing medical grade compression garments, not the cool compression like Lululemon leggings, but like medical grade. I mean, you can see I'm wearing one now. And you have to be smart about certain activities you do because that can exacerbate the swelling. And living in Houston when it's really hot and humid, which is 364 days out of the year, it feels like at times,
Right.
that can make symptoms worse. But secondary lymphedema is more common. And I know your mother has battled breast cancer, and
Hmm.
that's one of the most common incidences is patients have had chemo, radiation, or any surgical intervention where they remove lymph nodes, for example. That's why you'll see a lot of women with breast cancer. They develop secondary lymphedema as a result of that treatment.
Okay.
And the unfortunate part of lymphedema, primary or secondary, is it's progressive in nature and there's currently no cure for it. So you
Mm,
really just have to manage the symptoms. And for a
sure.
lot of especially cancer patients, it's a souvenir of the cancer that they don't want, right? They
Mm,
they they won the cancer battle, but now they have this lifelong battle of dealing with a painful condition,
yeah.
lymphedema.
And you shared a ton about I mean, going way back into your adolescence,
Yeah,
even
page 11 is
childhood.
when it all
Yeah,
started.
childhood. It's been a long struggle for you, and this past year has brought a lot of change since we talked on the Maybe God podcast.
Yes.
Just kind of walk us through the last year, the highlights and lowlights.
Yeah. So last year, and as we were wrapping up our episode, the big thing that I was going up to the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio for was to meet with a couple of specialists to basically come to some sort of consensus as to would a total knee replacement be the best treatment and course of action, or would something a little bit more radical, like a
Mhm.
planned above knee amputation? Um, in 2016 is when I was first kind of given a potential prognosis of an amputation, but I've been trying to avoid that like the plague.
Yeah,
Nobody wants to lose a limb,
of
especially
course.
when you have to opt into the surgery.
Of course. Yeah.
So, after meeting with those specialists in Cleveland Clinic, we determined that the best course of action moving forward was a total knee replacement, right? Because, a knee replacement's irreversible, but it's a little less radical than an amputation.
Right.
So,
We went into
I
that with a lot of hope.
a lot of hope. And you put hopes in a lot of these doctors and specialists. I didn't go to medical school.
Right.
And I think the older I get, I realize that these doctors and specialists are just human beings. And that's why they call it practicing medicine. No one has
Mm,
perfected medicine. And when you have a rare condition like lymphedema, there's a lot of unknown variables. And when I had the knee replacement, that was very difficult because that even had more complications.
okay.
So I think the last we left off in the episode was I was battling a blood clot
Yes.
after the knee replacement surgery that required me to go to the emergency room. And maybe later on we can talk a little bit more in depth of how that had a profound impact on my relationship with Jesus in that moment. But um, fast forward this past year, the recovery has been living hell.
Really.
And it turns out the reason why it's been so difficult is the knee replacement was not properly performed.
Oh.
And so dealing with that chronic pain and almost kind of feeling weak because I've been in the medical device sales and medical consulting world. And the average patient, like even in their 60s and 70s who get total knee replacements, they're typically back to their new normal within
Sure.
5 to 6 months.
Yeah.
So I was about a year out and I was still struggling to walk. I had to keep a crutch in my car, just nights of being woken up at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in pain and not being able to go back to sleep.
What they do wrong?
Um,
Can you talk about it?
basically, the hardware was not adequately placed, and the sizing of the hardware wasn't great. But the other part too is just the bone itself had been through so much trauma. That was my 16th surgery
16th
on
surgery.
that knee. So it's almost like you can't really blame a construction worker or a contractor for doing a renovation on a home that already had a terrible foundation, whether it was from like hurricane or termite. So I've gotten past the headspace of having resentment towards that surgeon because he really is and was a great man, incredible bedside manner.
Mm,
He basically did the best he could at that time,
yeah.
given a really unfortunate and undesirable environment, which was the state of my knee.
Right. Wow, that's amazing that you've moved past the resentment because that would seem to be something that would stick with most people, with
Well,
me anyway.
yeah, and there was some short moments where I had that resentment, but I also realized that wasn't gonna put me in a path forward. If I stayed in that space of resentment, it would only cause me to be more stressed out, and it wouldn't get me to a place where I could truly heal and move forward with the next phase of my life,
Sure.
which, I guess that's the segue into what's coming down and now.
Well, first, just
Yeah.
have you had to have subsequent surgeries since the knee replacement?
No, I have not had subsequent, surgeries, but what I have gone through is pretty extensive physical therapy,
Okay.
and with the physical therapy, I mean, one of my therapists, he's like this big bodybuilder guy. If you see a picture of him, you're like, "Wow, like, that's who's working on you?" I mean, it's called a manipulation, which basically means force bending
Hmm.
the leg, and I had the little joke with him. I'd say, "Dr. Clay, go grab the towel," because that would basically be my way of putting the towel veil over my head and then biting into the other end of it so he couldn't see me
Oh my
cry, because
gosh.
I would literally be in tears at every appointment. And it's interesting because when people go through some sort of recovery, especially post-op, they have this whole thing embedded in their minds, "No pain, no gain."
Yeah,
But there's a balance to that.
of course.
And it's really tough to discern if you're having pain because your body's getting stronger or if you're having pain because something is not right.
Right.
And it took me getting 6 other opinions from orthopedic surgeons to determine that the past surgery, the knee replacement, was not done right. So my body was telling me something was wrong.
Sure. Yeah, it was one of those deals where the pain wasn't gain. It was
No,
just a warning sign.
exactly.
So, what were your options when that became clear?
Well, it was basically, hey, we can do a revision of the knee replacement, which was going to require an additional 3 surgeries. Hey, you have 16 surgeries. What's 19? But, at that point, knowing that if I went the revision route, they would replace the existing hardware, put larger hardware in. And if at any point in time with that new larger hardware, if that got infected, which one thing with lymphedema patients, we are prone to reoccurrences of infection.
Yeah.
And mine is a more severe case because I have infection of the bone.
Uh huh.
And so if that bone was to get infection with the new larger hardware, that means amputation was inevitable and the residual limb becomes much shorter. And just so the viewers know that when the limb is shorter, that's less of a surface area for the prosthetic, so for the new leg to grip onto. So it makes mobility even that much more challenging.
Mm, okay.
So as soon as I heard that prognosis that, okay, this could work, but it's not guaranteed to work. And if it does fail, the prosthetic process is going to be more difficult.
Right.
Immediately, that's where this light bulb went off and said, no, I'm going to do the above knee amputation, a
Mm.
planned above knee amputation.
Yeah. Planned as opposed to an emergency,
Right.
this or else kind of thing.
Right. And,
Okay.
there's, I guess, pros and cons to each of those scenarios. And one thing with a planned is it does give you a little bit of time to prepare, right? Physically, mentally, spiritually. And there's a lot of logistics. There's like insurance, pre-authorization.
Yeah.
There's actually figuring out who's going to be the team that fabricates your prosthetic leg,
Right.
figuring out what that leg's going to be. And then also just coming to grips with like you're losing a physical part of yourself
Mm,
and there's emotional attachment to that.
of course.
And then ultimately like forging a path forward versus if you're a veteran, for example, or just a regular civilian, you're in an automobile accident
Hmm.
and you just have that trauma and you wake up in the recovery room and your limb's gone. You don't have that time to respond. So there's really pros and cons to both.
Mm,
And now looking at the watch here, it's
coming
15
up.
days
15 days to amputation.
till amputation. Hmm.
15 days.
Yeah,
2 weeks and a day.
2 weeks in a day.
How does that feel?
I want to say bittersweet,
Yeah.
but there's moments in every single day leading up that it's more the bitterness.
Really?
Um, I feel that, and again, this is a feeling that the way the enemy has found its way to get into my headspace is moments when I'm the most confident, moments when, or seasons in my life when I feel like I've got the strongest relationship with Jesus and my faith. That's when the enemy finds ways to put those moments of doubts. Even like algorithmically in social media, like I'll be scrolling and then I'll see, an old friend on a trip somewhere overseas. And I see, on other professional athletes living these crazy physical lives and all these dreams and aspirations that I once had that were robbed of me because of, the lymphedema and all these surgeries.
Mm,
It does tend to cause me to spiral at times, but I think one thing of consistency with my faith and processing the pain that I've already endured is really this acronym for pain that I came up with, and that's persevering against internal negativity.
mm.
And having that headspace has really helped process pain and know that it's a teacher and it doesn't have to be all negative that the world or that your subconscious mind tries to tell you it is.
Yeah. I've been, honestly, Cam, I've been amazed at not only everything that you've been through and how you've kept going, but how you've allowed it to be a teacher. And everybody can say that. It's a great slogan. Pain is a teacher. Yeah, great. But actually going through it and being taught by it and humbled by it, um, and made better. I was joking with some guys after our prayer group
Hmm.
this morning that first time I met you was at Capo Coffee. You had
Yep.
been coming to the story for a while.
Hmm.
And interestingly enough, like your body was better then. You
Hmm.
you didn't have any apparent like disability or any kind of like anything slowing you down physically. Not that
Hmm.
I could see. I'm
Right.
sure there were other things, but the lymphedema, I guess, was obviously not what it became since
Yeah, it
then.
was well managed at that time,
Yeah,
for sure.
and your big conundrum in life at that point was finding a girl,
Hmm.
and you were a different person then, bro. And I don't know that I've told you this, but I remember thinking at that coffee meeting, I was like, yeah, this guy's got some growing up to do. Like, if I'm a dad of a 20 something girl, like, I'm not letting her date him. Or it's like, or I would not advise her to date this guy because, the Bachelorette thing and
Yeah.
social media stuff. And I just sensed in you, I'm sorry, bro, if this is like just rude, but like a kind of a shallowness compared to who you are now.
And it was that.
Yeah.
Truthfully, it was.
And it wasn't even that long ago. That
No.
was pre-COVID, but not far before COVID.
Right. Yeah.
2019, maybe.
Yeah. End of 2019,
Yeah.
because that's when I moved to Houston.
Right.
Hmm.
And man, today, like, I mean, if I had a 20 something single daughter, I'm like, go out with Cam, go out with Cam. Because it's like watching a boy become a man. But I know that it was in part the circumstances of the pain that brought that man out of you, and made you who you are today, to just this great man, a walking testament to fortitude and to faith.
Well, something you told me at that meeting in the coffee shop that did resonate and still does. You basically said, "We gotta pop open the hood of, like, my spiritual life and,
Yeah.
like, get in there and figure this out." Like, I didn't have a lot of questions that day that we met, and you didn't have a lot of answers, but it was kind of like the stepping point to not only getting more engaged with the story, but there's a lot of people like marketers, for example. They always say, "Well, start with the why,"
Mhm.
and in my mind, it was not just like, okay, well, why am I meeting with Pastor Eric here today? I haven't met with you. Were like the first pastor I had like coffee with, and I
Mhm.
grew up going to church,
Yeah.
in the most traditional sense, holidays, and there was a season where we were going more regularly, but I hadn't had, a meeting with the pastor like you in over 2 decades.
Yeah.
So, part and partial, and people can go back to the podcast and listen to it, but what brought me to the story was trying to woo a certain girl who was a member of the story. So I'm like, "Well, if I get in with Pastor Eric and, maybe he can put in a word for me,"
Bro,
type
that happens
thing.
all the time.
Yeah.
People use me.
Yeah.
Like, if I meet with the pastor, my wife won't be mad at me. She'll see that I'm trying, Jordan.
Right,
Yeah, it's like
right. Like,
that
almost like
feels
going to
great.
therapy, right? Like,
Yeah,
I'm trying,
yeah.
but, God did plant a seed that day, and I didn't know at the time what it was gonna grow to be, and, obviously, as this conversation unfolds and we can talk maybe about the day of the blood clot where that was rock bottom from a physical perspective,
Mm.
but, like, a mountain peak of my faith.
Yeah, yeah. Well, our team is following you around for the next couple of weeks,
Mhm.
leading up to the big surgery date on the 22nd of June, and we'll be following you around afterward as well to tell the whole story. And we're going to make, for those of you watching, we're making a short documentary film of Cam's journey because we want the world to know. Actually, Cam wants the world to know about all of it, and not just the great outcome. Like, let's start rolling cameras 6 months from now when you're
Right.
recovering. No, he wants y'all to see everything. So that's why our crew's following you around for a while. And as you look ahead, Cam, what is it about the next 2 weeks and then the follow up to your surgery that, let's say this, that scares you the most?
Well, for starters, I admittedly do have a lot of PTSD from my time on The Bachelorette and Bachelor in Paradise, rightfully so.
Yeah.
So, allowing myself to be vulnerable again in front of cameras, even in this documentary style medium, took a lot of wrestling with my own self doubt.
Mm.
Am I going to be, edited in a certain light? Is my truth or my story going to be manipulated in a way to tell another narrative? But right now, like with a documentary, there's a center focus of a character or a person, if you will.
Hmm.
And what I want to make very clear, like, yes, this is my story, but I'm not the center focus of this. Jesus is the center focus of this.
Mm.
And um, I know that anytime you're going through any type of adversity, especially for younger people, we try to find inspiration in other people who've gone through it. So if anything else, the piece can inspire other, children or teens or young adults who are struggling with their faith, or maybe they have a physical disability, or just suffering in general, whether it's chronic or seasonal, that they can, gain some glimmer of inspiration and hope just from my story. Which
Mm.
the other thing too that's daunting about a documentary versus like a feature film is we don't know how this is going to end,
Right.
right? Like with medicine and surgery, there's a lot of complications that can arise. So to answer your question, what scares you the most, it is the fear of the unknown,
Mm.
of something potentially going wrong in this upcoming surgery, the enemy getting into my head and having that bitterness towards God that I used to have when I was going through all of these other surgeries for the past 8 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I was, for lack of better words, atheist. I didn't believe in God. I turned my back on him. I tried to go through everything on my terms, and that did not serve me well.
Yeah. And it's interesting, even when you met with me the first time, you weren't an atheist then.
I was a skeptic.
You were a skeptic, but even the belief you had about God was almost like God was useful to you. Maybe you were using God like you used me that day, like to get the girl.
Sure, yeah, absolutely, yeah,
But it's like God, we keep God around so he's handy when we struggle. And now to hear you say that this documentary, this project, this whole thing is about Jesus first, that's just another sign to me that you've switched seats with God. Like no longer is God like your wingman. It's
right.
like you've properly put yourself under his authority, guidance, providence.
Yeah,
That's
well,
the shift I've seen in you.
Pastor Kale, had this conversation with me. It was probably about a year ago as well, and it was during, I think, my 2nd session at Leading Men, and we started talking about the dynamics of our faith through the lens of, like, the analogy of, like, banking. You have deposits and withdrawals,
Mhm.
right? And for me, for my relationship with God, it was all withdrawals. What can you give me, God? What can you give me? How can you be with me in this season of pain? I wasn't giving any glory to him. I wasn't reading the Bible. I wasn't going to church consistently. I wasn't trying to be an active disciple. I wasn't
Right,
trying to lead by example with my close group of friends who've
right.
known me most of my life and know the other side of me, the partier side, the womanizer side. So when that dynamic was brought to my attention, having that conscious awareness of that, a relationship with Jesus is no different than that of a marriage
Mhm.
or any other friendship, right? You need to wrestle with him. When you have doubts, talk about those doubts. Don't just brush it under the rug and have nothing but happy, optimistic posts on your social media that, we were talking about this earlier this morning, too blessed to be stressed
Right.
or depressed,
Mhm.
right? And there's some truth to that, but that's not sustainable. And honestly, it's not realistic.
It's not biblical. I
No,
mean, it's not fully biblical. Sure, not being depressed is a blessing. Sure, great, especially if you struggle with depression.
right.
Um, but the Bible talks about struggle as blessing
Yeah.
and pain and persecution and all of it as blessing. How you experience that?
Well, so we'll bring it back to last year when I was recovering from the knee replacement. I had the blood clot, and when I was recovering at my parents' house, I was in the worst physical pain in my entire life. I literally hadn't slept more than an hour a day for 2 weeks, so sleep deprived. I was on so much pain medication that wasn't even working, but I couldn't eat anything and I couldn't even really move my leg. Any slight movement, I'm talking inches, would just send me through the roof in pain. And in that particular afternoon, I knew that something else was wrong because I started running a fever.
Mm,
And no one has poured battery acid on my leg before, but I could imagine it was pretty close because literally the bone was deteriorating away and the blood clot was making the pain pretty severe. So
wow.
when the EMS came to take me to the emergency room, one of the paramedics had to basically sedate me with a ketamine infusion. And for those who don't know, that's a horse tranquilizer, but it's also used in anesthesia and actually also in therapeutic settings for PTSD, pain, and other trauma. And I'd never had any experience with that before, but in that moment, within 4 seconds, I literally could almost feel physiologically my soul leaving my body. And at that point in time, I'd been going to the story, I'd been doing some of them in small groups, but I hadn't had that moment
Yeah,
yet
yeah.
where the Holy Spirit just really captivated me.
Mm,
And being in that, I don't want to call it a near death experience, but being in that moment of so all encompassing pain, I don't want to use excruciating pain because I wasn't at the cross,
there you
right?
go. Yeah.
But the most terrific, terrifying pain, that's where literally I could feel the presence of God. And I had this vision of him reaching down like I was drowning in this sea of pain and him pulling me up. And in that moment, I knew my life would never be the same again.
Wow.
And um, when I was recovering there in the hospital, I was so blessed that all of my nurses were believers. So every night they would pray with me. And even with going through that terrible pain as I was recovering from the blood clot, I just had this peace about me. And I talked about this on the podcast with you, but my whole headspace at that point was God wouldn't put me through anything that he couldn't get me through.
Yeah. Man, I figured there was a turning moment because the change I've seen in you has been so extreme, but I've never heard that specific story.
Yeah.
And recently we talked about how pain sort of intersects with or runs parallel to faith in a way that, and even lifestyle, like the more pain you experience for Christ, the less like sin there is in your life, which
Right.
sound that's literally what it says, right? First Peter
Mhm.
4.
And 4, yeah.
Have you experienced that phenomenon?
Yeah, just a practical example. So when I started to be more public about my faith on social media, for example, I was losing followers, right?
Yeah.
And I always struggle with that word followers because I am not Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And I don't like how it's called that, but I guess people who had followed my journey and
We should call
honestly,
them voyeurs.
yeah,
That's what they
voyeurs,
are.
right? These voyeurs were mostly interested in probably like bachelorette related stuff, but
Yeah.
I've quickly used that platform for lymphedema awareness and now sharing my testimony, my growing relationship with Jesus. And, as a result, I have lost a lot of those people who once, supported me.
Sure.
But I think really for my purpose of all of this is, it's quality over quantity. And I yearn for these deeper, meaningful conversations and connections with people because I know that's where true change and positive change can transform people's lives.
Yeah. I think you got a taste of fame,
Yeah,
and by the grace of God, it it scorched you. It destroyed you.
did.
That experience did. But again, by the grace of God, because you still have this special, unique gift to connect. And I don't say that to float your ego, but like you still have the gift of words, of presence. You look like Bradley Cooper. That doesn't hurt. Uh, you still have all that going for you, and yet you've seen through the sham that is empty fame and glory, and you still want to be in the spotlight, but not for you anymore.
Right. And this is what I will tell all listeners: fame and this gratification on being a social media influencer, for example, it is a lie. I know a lot of people in Bachelor franchise and in other sectors of entertainment who literally have millions of followers, and I know those people are the most unhappy.
Mm,
We put on these metaphorical masks and we literally use filters and happy captioning, and we put on these 15 to 1 minute video clips. It's just a snapshot into how perfect our lives are. And one of my favorite images that I saw on coincidentally Instagram was of this like perfectly shiny apple, and it was looking in a mirror and you see like the reflection of this apple, but then the shot was from behind the apple and you see a huge bite taken out of the
mhm,
apple, but no one sees that. No one sees the trauma, the pain, and the insecurities that lie in this pursuit of perfection.
right. And what you've done is you turned the apple around,
Yeah, this is me.
and you've shown everything, um, good and bad, and you're willing to be uncomfortable and to make others uncomfortable because God has shown you something about discomfort and pain.
Yeah,
It's like that's part of where meaning is found.
right. Right. And we talked about this earlier this morning in our small group of Jesus lived a life of suffering, like even before the cross,
Right.
right? And the Bible tells us to strive to be more like him. So we have to lean into that suffering, and um, that's why Romans 5:3-4 is now my new favorite Bible verse, and it's
Yeah.
about rejoicing in suffering, right? Because through that rejoicing, you're building perseverance and character, which then ultimately leads to hope. And when you're going through seasons or moments of pain and you don't have that to cling on to, you're just gonna fall deeper into a
Right.
pit of despair. And you cling on to things like I have in the past with alcohol, drugs, unfulfilling physical relationships
Right.
to where, it's not going to sustain you.
Is the tattoo finished?
It's never finished, but I do have the verse on there. And
Romans 5,
Romans 5:3-4.
3 to 4.
Yeah. So I guess really what I want people to understand about pain, other than it being a teacher, is that there's going to be moments where the pain feels way too overwhelming, and that's okay. Like, God wants you to wrestle in the relationship with Him. And I think another thing that scares me about this upcoming surgery is that the pain may be so intense that all of this conversation that we're having now, past podcasts, past, you know, relationships that I've formed at the church and in the community, I could become someone else.
Yeah,
And, that is scary to me because, we don't know how it's gonna end up. But I think
sure.
that's what faith is about, is trusting that God has gone before you and that everything is going to be okay. And
Yeah.
and you even had a sermon about faith over fear. When there is a deficit of faith, there is a surplus of fear, and
Mm,
the inverse as well.
that's right. And when you're vulnerable enough to tell your story publicly, there's an accountability that comes with that.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were pretending publicly that everything's fine going into this surgery and not even telling the world about your surgery, but just having a superficial plastic faith for the world to see and go, "Oh, that's nice." You lose your leg, you come out of that recovery, you could very well become a much different person.
Yeah.
And yet you're choosing to tell the whole world about the other side of the apple and to show what that really looks like. And what will happen is the spirit of God and the community of God surrounds you through it then. And I think there's much less likelihood that this upcoming trial will have you or will change you fundamentally,
Right.
or will wreck you
Right.
in a bad way. um so man, first of all, I'm just sorry. I don't know what else to say. I know you're receiving this suffering as a blessing, and I applaud that, and I think that's biblically on point. But I'm sorry. And I was going through an airport the other day. I was in Atlanta, and there was a guy there who's a little older than you, somewhere between my age and yours,
Mhm.
and had a family with him. But he had, I don't know why, but he had lost a leg,
Mhm.
um, just above the knee, and had a prosthetic. And I'll be real with you, it's wasn't it looked like he had just received the prosthetic, like it was his first time walking on it or something, because it was
Yeah.
a struggle. And I just started crying right there in the airport, just looking at this man and thinking of you, really. And because I've grown to love you, and we've got a whole story like that very few other guys have been a part of. And the thought of you having to endure more breaks my heart.
Well, again, like, one of the other key deciding factors as to why I've decided to move forward with this amputation, again, is it's not about me, because I've been through the chronic pain. And I think we've talked about this before, the whole analogy of putting on your oxygen mask first before helping others. I have to do this for myself now so I can be a potential present spouse, a present father. I was talking to another friend a couple days ago, and she was asking me, like, well, how are you coming to peace and to terms with this? And I said, well, there's one incident in particular where I was at my sister's house and I was bending over to pick up my 1-year-old niece. And there was just a moment where I was scared that I was going to drop her
Hmm.
because my leg was going to give out on me.
Hmm.
And I don't want that fear for her. I don't want that fear for my future kids. I want to be the active dad who's coaching little leagues and not yelling at umpires.
Hey, that dad doesn't
I
exist.
know, I know. Yeah, I'm gonna be that dad. I can tell you right now, I'm overly competitive, but again, taking care of myself proactively now, I have the hope and optimism that that is gonna make me a better man
Yeah,
in the long run.
right. And I believe that it will. And I also believe, ironically enough, that if it is God's plan for you to just get married and
Right.
have kids, the kind of woman you will meet having gone through what you've gone through, the way that you have, will be like uh, like a light shining in darkness. Whereas before, the Cam I met at Cavo Coffee a few years ago, the kind of woman that would have been right for that man or that boy, I would say, not so much. And I think this whole test has grown you up and prepared you for everything God has in store for you, which is better than you can imagine at this point as you look down the barrel of this 15-day um, period before your surgery. Um, but Kim, I love you and your community here at Maybe God and at the Story Church, your family. You're just not alone in this.
And that's another thing that has been so special about my relationship with the story and this community is, they always say you don't get to choose your family because you're just born into it,
Yeah.
but the story is the family that I chose,
Mm-hmm.
and you guys accepted me just like a family would.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just so blessed to have that as a foundation and to be able to lean into it, not only when I'm having doubts about my faith, but to grow those relationships and just hear from so many extraordinary individuals with different walks of life,
Right.
married, single, different sexual identities. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, it truly feels like just a gumbo of believers and skeptics too, right? I
Uh-huh.
mean, if we're not having questions about our faith, I mean, we're not being genuine in our pursuit to be like Jesus.
Right. Absolutely.
I still have a lot of questions.
Do you?
I
You
do.
want to get into them, or maybe another
No, and
another
I
episode?
and I thought about this the other day. I feel that the dynamic of a relationship between someone in church and their pastor is like you are like my Siri or Alexa,
Oh,
right?
that's
There's there's
scary.
there's there's laziness and people ask questions and you'll spit out answers, biblically, but I need to have a relationship with God and Jesus that doesn't involve this automation and laziness. It
Uh-huh.
needs to be sincere, even if
Right.
it's just 2 seconds out of the day and just thanking God for, hey, thank you for that green light. Thank you for this cup of coffee. Thank you for, still having my hair, right?
Yeah, that's beautiful, I will say.
Thank you.
Or thank you even, like, for the pain.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that's where it gets real, and as you've learned and shared with us today. One thing I love about you, and we'll wrap with this, is the sense of humor you've been able to maintain through this, bro. Is that part of your coping mechanisms? Like,
It totally is.
yeah,
And, I think when you can add levity to serious situations, it does help you get over it faster. I mean, so a lot of my friends of the Jewish faith, they would tell me like the origins, especially coming off of the Holocaust, some of the funniest comedians are Jewish,
that's right.
right? And so for me, adding levity and a sense of humor is not necessarily just a coping mechanism, but it also makes it easier for people around me to process,
Yeah.
right? Because having a conversation with someone saying, "Hey, I'm about to lose my leg," I can just see like kind of the life sucked out of them. I'm like, "No, don't worry about it. I already got a hashtag. It's camputation, right? Y'all can call me
There
Lieutenant
it is.
Cam, right?" It's just stuff like that, and it's
Lieutenant Cam.
yeah, Forrest Gump
I
reference
get it,
for the
yeah.
millennials. Uh, and it's not just to make light of the situation, but it's to let people know that I'm going to be okay. I'm going to
Amen.
be great
Amen.
because God has already gone before me in this situation.
Amen. What's the name of the hospital you're going to next week or this week?
Oh, CHOP.
I'm
I'm
sorry,
literally
bro.
going to CHOP.
Could
It's
you have picked?
Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I couldn't have picked a better hospital. Yeah.
You remember when we were praying with our men's group a couple of months ago, and the
Yes.
oldest guy in the group was saying the most profound and serious prayer,
Yeah.
and then he said something about like, "Lord, and keep the doctors sharp," and then
Yeah.
he was like, "Oh my God," and the whole group just stopped and laughed.
Yeah, I definitely remember that moment. But as I'm gonna continue to say, I've already done the legwork. I'm gonna go out on my limb here, and though this is my last leg to stand on, God is gonna pull me through.
I love it. I love it. You're just full of euphemisms
I
and
am.
puns.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yep.
That's great.
Yep.
Keep laughing, Cam.
Yep.
Keep believing and leaning on people that God puts around you, and of course, leaning on God Himself,
Amen.
who never lets us down.
And people don't need to forget that. I feel like Jesus has a sense of humor. He has to.
He must, right?
He must.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, clearly He did. Just jumps off the page in the Gospels. Like,
Right.
how much longer do I have to put up with these people? It's
Right.
like, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, again, for our viewers on this YouTube channel, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notifications bell because we are going to be releasing new content, including short documentary film about Cam's journey that's going to be produced by Julie and the team here at Maybe God. So we're really excited about that. And all of our prayers are going to be with you, Cam, over the next not just 2 weeks, but even beyond as you recover. And we can't wait to hear more about you and from you in the coming months.
Amen.
All right,
Thank you,
brother.
Eric.
Thank you all for tuning in today. Y'all have a great day.